It was just a cardboard box. Small, unassuming, left by the delivery service on our front porch like it had been dozens of times before. But inside that box was something far more important than books or groceries. It was my disabled daughter's life-saving medication. Without it, her body would begin to seize, her breathing would tighten, her muscles would contract until she could barely move. That tiny package was the difference between safety and the ER. And on that warm Thursday morning, when I opened our front door, expecting to see it waiting, it was gone. At first, I thought maybe the driver had left it at the wrong house. Maybe they delayed the drop. Maybe it was still on its way. But something didn't feel right. I checked the app, delivered. 5 minutes ago. I checked our security cam, and there she was, Karen, in broad daylight, walking across our shared path like she owned the entire neighborhood. She looked down at the box, read the label, and scooped it up into her arms like she was doing the world a favor. No hesitation. No shame. She tucked it under her arm like it was junk mail, turned around, and walked back toward her pristine beige porch with her little potted azaleas framing the door like nothing had happened. I ran across the street, heart pounding, fist shaking. She met me at the steps, arms folded, holding the box casually in her hand like she was a judge and I was on trial. "You don't have the authority to approve this kind of delivery," she said flatly. "This isn't FDA cleared for neighborhood distribution." My mouth dropped open. "That's my daughter's medication," I said. "It was prescribed by her doctor. She needs it today." Karen's expression didn't change. "I don't care what your doctor says. The HOA has a duty to protect the community. We don't allow suspicious substances to be left unattended. You'll get it back after we conduct a review." A review? My daughter was inside, already beginning to show signs of tension in her legs. She was on a strict dosing schedule, and that schedule had been shattered by a woman who thought she had the right to police other people's health. "You took medicine from a child," I said, my voice trembling. "You stole it." Karen shrugged. "I prevented a potential safety violation." And then she shut the door in my face with the box still in her hands. I sprinted back home, praying I wasn't too late. But inside, my daughter was already slumped in her chair, her breath ragged, eyes wide. And in that moment, as I called 911 with shaking fingers, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an attack, and it could have killed her. Our lives revolve around time. Not in the way most families mark time, school drop-offs, soccer practice, bedtime routines, but in rigid, unforgiving increments dictated by medication seizures and blood oxygen levels. My daughter, Lily, was born with a rare neurological disorder that affects her muscle control, breathing, and cognitive function. Every day, she takes a precise cocktail of medications, each one calibrated to manage the fine balance that keeps her body functioning. Too little and her muscles seize. Too much and she can lose consciousness. One of her prescriptions controls the tension in her lungs, another keeps her nerve signals from overfiring. The most critical one, a medication only delivered via specialty pharmacy, is temperature sensitive, must be dosed every 8 hours, and without it, we risk full-body seizures and respiratory failure. We've lived with this regimen for almost 6 years. 6 years of alarms set for 4 a.m. doses, of refrigerated storage bins labeled by day and time, of watching her chest rise and fall with the obsessive focus of a mother who knows that missing a single moment could mean a hospital stay or worse. It hasn't always been easy, but we've made it work. We've built a life around Lily's needs, carefully, delicately, with every schedule fine-tuned to the second. I've battled insurance companies, chased down shipments, argued with pharmacies, and sat on hold with hospital systems while holding my daughter in my lap, praying she wouldn't crash before we got an answer. My husband works from home, just so one of us is always here in case a delivery comes early or late. And we've taught Lily in her own way to understand the importance of her medicine. She can't speak, but she knows when it's time. She touches the drawer, taps her tablet, and gives us a little smile when the dose is over. She doesn't complain. She doesn't resist. She knows that medicine is her bridge to stability. It's what keeps her strong enough to use her chair, to paint, to breathe easy at night. When we moved into Willow Crest, we were promised accessibility, safety, and peace. The neighborhood boasted ADA-compliant sidewalks, quiet traffic zones, and well-lit roads. What we didn't anticipate was the culture of control that lurked beneath all that order. Our first few months were uneventful. I notified the HOA about Lily's condition in our accessibility paperwork, and they didn't object. They noted her ramp. They acknowledged our need for frequent deliveries. At least that's what I thought. But then came the raised eyebrows, the comments about how many boxes we received. One neighbor jokingly asked if we were running a pharmacy. At first, I laughed it off. But laughter turned to worry the day we received a warning from the HOA about unverified drop-offs being left on doorsteps. They didn't name us, but the timing was too specific to ignore. We were the only home on our street receiving time-sensitive medical packages twice a week. I tried to be proactive. I wrote a formal letter to the board explaining Lily's condition in gentle, human terms, no jargon, no legalese. I even attached a letter from her pediatric specialist outlining how critical her meds were and why they couldn't be delayed or rerouted. I offered to install a lockbox to notify the HOA each time a delivery was scheduled to show our prescription records. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted to keep my child safe. I received a polite, vague response. Thank you for your communication. We are currently reviewing delivery guidelines for community safety. I remember reading that line over and over again, wondering what safety meant to them. Who exactly were they protecting? Karen entered the picture shortly after. She introduced herself during a routine walk, all fake warmth and clipped tones. I'm just so glad we have a board that really cares about structure, she said, staring at the delivery van parked outside our home. Some people think just because it's medicine, they don't need to follow the rules. I was stunned into silence. She hadn't even bothered to pretend she didn't know. That was her way, passive-aggressive, with a veneer of concern so thin it cracked every time she opened her mouth. That night, I found a note stuck under our doormat. Medication safety is not just your responsibility. It's ours too. I reported it to the HOA. They said there was no proof it came from Karen, that I should consider limiting the frequency of our deliveries or rerouting them to the office, an option explicitly ruled out by our pharmacy due to storage requirements. I pushed back. I explained again and again, but each reply felt colder, more procedural. I could feel the shift. I could feel the resentment, like we were a burden, a risk, a disruption to their carefully curated community. Still, through it all, I never imagined anyone would touch her medicine, not even Karen, not even someone that heartless. That's why, the day it disappeared, I didn't just panic, I shattered. Because for all our planning, all our sacrifices, and all the battles we'd already fought, there's one thing I never thought I'd have to protect my daughter from. Someone who thought her survival wasn't HOA approved. Karen introduced herself like a character from a glossy HOA handbook. She rang our doorbell, wearing a crisp beige cardigan, holding a clipboard, and smiling the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Hi there. Welcome to the neighborhood," she said brightly. "I'm Karen, head of the HOA Compliance Committee. Just doing my rounds and making sure everyone has what they need to be aligned with community standards." Her tone was warm, but I felt the temperature drop the moment she glanced past me and saw the pharmacy package sitting unopened by the door. Her smile wavered. "Oh," she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That a delivery?" I nodded. "Yes, it's my daughter's medication. She's on a strict dosing schedule." Karen tilted her head. "Prescription, I assume?" The question wasn't curious. It was challenging. At the time, I didn't think too much of it. I chalked her attitude up to nosy neighbor syndrome and let it go. But the questions didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, Karen made a habit of showing up near our driveway right around the time our deliveries arrived. Sometimes she'd be watering her plants, other times checking sidewalk cracks with a tape measure in hand. It quickly became clear she wasn't concerned about community upkeep, she was watching us. One morning, as the delivery driver handed me Lily's package, Karen called out from across the street, "Is that the same medication as last time?" Some of these pharmaceuticals have recalls, especially ones not FDA cleared. I froze. It's FDA approved. It comes from a licensed specialty pharmacy. I replied firmly. She nodded like she was humoring me, then said, a lot of communities require advance approval for medical deliveries. It's a liability issue. I blinked. What kind of liability does a child's medication cause? Karen didn't answer. She just smiled. That thin, perfect policy-obsessed smile. She began citing rules that didn't exist. At a community meeting, she brought up the idea of medication drop box approval, claiming that certain chemicals could endanger children if left unattended. She never used Lily's name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she meant. She used phrases like communal integrity and neighborhood hygiene standards to wrap her bias in faux concern. When someone else on the board suggested she was being too aggressive, Karen shrugged and said, "I'm just thinking about the children." As if my child didn't count. Then came the flyers, slipped under doors, tacked to the community bulletin board, even emailed through the HOA's official channel. They warned of unregulated substances being delivered near children's gathering spaces and urged residents to report any packages that appear suspicious or medical in nature. I confronted her, furious. She folded her arms and said, I've spoken to neighbors. Some are uncomfortable. We just want to make sure your daughter is safe and everyone else." She made it sound like Lily's existence was a biohazard. I started documenting everything, times, dates, photos. But even that didn't stop her. She started going further, asking about dosages. Is she supposed to be taking that much? Children shouldn't be on so many medications. It's not natural. She said that right to my face. When I asked how that was any of her business, she replied, "When it involves community exposure, it becomes all our business." Exposure? Like my daughter was leaking poison. Still, the HOA did nothing. Karen was one of the most active members, known for keeping things in line. I was the problem parent, the one who had so many needs. One board member even suggested I start picking up Lily's meds off-site, an hour away, so no one would have to see them dropped off. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just difficult, she was dangerous. Not because she yelled, but because she smiled as she erased us. She wrapped her cruelty in rules, folded her ignorance into policy, and wore it all like a badge of honor. And I should have known then she wasn't going to stop at questions, warnings, or suggestions. Karen didn't just want compliance. She wanted control. And the moment she saw my daughter's medicine as a threat to her perfect little world, she crossed a line that would change all our lives forever. It started slowly, almost subtly. A sideways glance when a delivery driver dropped off Lily's medicine. A clipboard carried a little too often. But soon, Karen's obsession shifted from quiet control to open hostility. The first sign was a typed letter folded neatly into our mailbox, not an official HOA document, just a plain sheet of paper with no signature, no letterhead. It read, "Residents are reminded that deliveries containing non-household chemical substances must be registered with the community board to avoid safety violations." I stared at it, stunned. It didn't cite any specific rule, because there wasn't one. It didn't mention my name, but I knew exactly who it was aimed at. We were the only house on our street receiving frequent medical deliveries. I took the letter to the HOA office, thinking surely this was a mistake. Maybe someone had acted on their own. But the staff just looked at it blandly and said, "We can't control what residents choose to communicate informally. If you believe you're being harassed, you may want to speak with the compliance chair." Of course, that chair was Karen. Reporting Karen to herself felt as useful as screaming into a canyon. Soon after, I received my first official warning notice from the HOA, excessive delivery volume raising community safety concerns. I couldn't believe what I was reading. We weren't ordering fireworks or gas canisters. We were receiving temperature-sensitive, life-sustaining medication for a disabled child. I appealed the notice in writing, explaining that every delivery was medically necessary, supported by a doctor's prescription, and had been disclosed in our original HOA paperwork. Days later, I received another letter. Not a reply, just a new warning. Repeated delivery of unverified substances may result in board action. The real tipping point came when I found the note. It was tucked beneath the welcome mat, printed on ivory cardstock in neat, centered font. It read, "Unknown pharmaceuticals are not permitted on HOA property without inspection." I remember standing there, holding that note in my hand, feeling like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. My hands started to shake. I knew then that Karen had decided to make this personal. My daughter's health, her survival, her most basic right to receive medicine safely. It was now Karen's battlefield. And worse, she was disguising her cruelty behind the armor of community wellness. I showed the note to my husband. He looked at it, then at me, and said, "She's trying to scare you into stopping the deliveries." And it worked, at least for a while. I started hovering near the window every morning, watching for the delivery driver like a hawk. Sometimes, if I caught them fast enough, I'd meet them at the corner of the street, away from Karen's line of sight. Other times, I left notes asking for them to leave the package behind a potted plant. We even considered installing a lockbox, but the pharmacy refused, citing storage regulations and temperature constraints. Lily's medicine wasn't something you could just toss into a metal box and hope for the best. Then came the false complaints. A neighbor, clearly parroting Karen's words, claimed we had unmarked packages arriving at odd hours. Another said chemical smells were wafting from the porch. We had no idea who was saying what. Karen kept everything vague, spoken in half-truths at board meetings and whispered conversations. But the effect was real. The HOA sent another letter, this time citing health concerns from surrounding residents. They threatened to reassess our resident compliance status if we didn't cooperate with safety review procedures. We were being targeted, isolated, gaslit, and all for trying to keep a little girl alive. I emailed Karen directly, calmly, firmly, with copies of prescriptions and medical documentation. I told her these deliveries were legal, essential, and protected under both state and federal law. Her reply was chilling. HOA communities operate under their own set of guidelines. Not all public accommodations apply equally within private governance. Perhaps you should reconsider the frequency or method of delivery to avoid further issues. That was when I realized Karen wasn't just overstepping, she was rewriting the rules to serve her obsession with control. She didn't care about Lily's diagnosis. She didn't care about the law. She cared about maintaining the aesthetic and predictability of her precious community, even if it meant endangering a child. The stress began to affect Lily, too. She grew anxious every time the doorbell rang. She started asking in her quiet digital voice, "Will the box be okay?" I reassured her as best I could, but inside I was unraveling. I double-checked every shipment. I reviewed our cameras twice a day. I became obsessed with tracking numbers. Our peaceful little routine had become a siege, and it all traced back to one woman with a fake smile and a terrifying sense of righteousness. But the scariest part wasn't the warnings. It wasn't even the threats. It was the growing fear that one day Karen wouldn't just leave a note, that one day she would act, that she would take matters into her own hands. And she did. The text alert came at 10:02 a.m., just like it always did. "Your package has been delivered." I was upstairs folding laundry when I saw it flash across my phone screen. I dropped everything and hurried down, already planning to grab it before Karen had a chance to notice. But when I opened the door, the porch was empty. My heart stopped. The welcome mat lay undisturbed. The potted plant I sometimes used to shield deliveries still in place. But the small white box, marked with the medical label and cold pack warning, was gone. I blinked, confused, then opened the tracking app again. Delivered, front door. 10 minutes ago. It hadn't been stolen by a stranger. No van had pulled up. Someone who knew the delivery schedule had taken it. Someone close. I turned and ran to the kitchen, pulled up our security camera app, and scanned through the last 15 minutes. There she was, Karen, walking calmly across the sidewalk at 10:04, clipboard in one hand, sunglasses perched on her head like she had nothing to hide. She bent down, picked up the box, looked directly at her door, and walked away. My stomach twisted. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped my phone. I stormed outside and crossed the sidewalk, barely registering the heat rising off the pavement. I didn't knock when I got to her house. I pounded. She opened the door like she'd been expecting me. Her expression was flat, almost bored, and in her hand still was the box. My daughter's medication. The lid slightly opened, revealing the padded ice pack and white vials inside. "You took it," I said, my voice low and trembling. "That's Lily's medication. You had no right, no authority to touch it." Karen raised an eyebrow, then slowly stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "That package," she said slowly, as if talking to a child, "was left in a visible location without verification. As head of the compliance board, I have the responsibility to intervene when there's a risk to the community." I stared at her, dumbfounded. What risk? She's a disabled child. That medicine keeps her alive. Karen clutched the box to her chest. "I'm not a doctor," she said, "but I do know this neighborhood has strict guidelines about chemical storage and unapproved substances. These vials weren't documented with the board." I took a step closer, fists clenched. "You stole medicine from a child," I said, every word vibrating with fury. "That's not compliance. That's criminal." Karen didn't flinch. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Unapproved substances are a danger to children in this neighborhood." Then she turned, walked back inside, and shut the door in my face, locking it with a final metallic click that sent chills down my spine. I stood there, stunned, for a full minute before turning and sprinting back to house. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely type the emergency line. "She took it," I whispered into the phone. "My daughter's medicine. I have her on camera. I have proof. My child needs that medication now." I raced upstairs to check on Lily. She was sitting in her chair, her head tilted slightly, her fingers tapping the edge of her armrest, her signal that her muscles were beginning to tighten. Her scheduled dose had passed. She could feel the change in her body before I could even see it. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing her hair from her face. "I'm going to fix this." The police arrived within 15 minutes. I showed them the footage. They watched in silence, brows furrowed. One officer turned to the other and said, "She's just walking up and taking it, like it belongs to her." The older officer nodded. "That's tampering, maybe even theft, and it's medicine for a minor? That could qualify as endangering a child." Relief swept through me. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. They walked across the street and knocked on Karen's door. She took longer to answer this time. When she did, her smile was gone. She looked smaller, more rigid. She said something I couldn't hear, then disappeared back inside. A few minutes later, one of the officers walked back to me with the box in hand, sealed, intact, but warm, too warm. The ice packs had softened. I thanked him, took it carefully, and rushed back inside. It wasn't cold enough. The medication was only viable within a tight temperature range. I checked the labels. I checked the timers. I made the call to the specialty pharmacy. Their response was crushing. "We cannot guarantee the efficacy. You should not administer that dose. A replacement shipment will be sent tomorrow." My daughter couldn't wait until tomorrow. The backup dose was a day away. And now, she was without her most critical medication because someone decided her survival didn't match their idea of approved. I sat on the floor of our kitchen, clutching the box and trying not to scream. Because I knew then, Karen hadn't just taken a package. She had endangered my child's life. And I was going to make sure the entire world knew what she had done. I didn't even have time to cry. The moment the pharmacy told me the dose was compromised, my mind flipped into survival mode. I ran to Lily's room. Her skin was pale, a thin sheen of sweat beading on her forehead. She sat stiffly in her chair, her arms rigid at her sides, her fingers twitching in short, involuntary spasms. Her breathing was shallow, too shallow. "Lily, I whispered, kneeling beside her. Can you hear me? She blinked slowly, her body leaning forward like her spine could no longer hold her upright. That's when I saw it, the subtle tremor starting in her right foot, then climbing up her leg like a fuse burning towards something explosive. Her left hand clenched into a tight fist, and her jaw began to lock. I'd seen it before. It was a seizure coming on, silent, deadly, and fast. I grabbed her emergency rescue medication from the fridge, but it was the second line of defense, not a replacement for her scheduled dose. I administered it as quickly as I could, holding her steady, whispering to her even though I didn't know if she could hear me. I've got you. Stay with me. Mommy's right here. She slumped suddenly. Her eyes rolled back. Her limbs jerked once, twice, and then went terrifyingly still. I called 911 with shaking hands, screaming into the phone. My daughter's seizing. She missed a critical medication dose. Please hurry. Time warped in that moment. Minutes stretched into years as I clutched her, begging the ambulance to come faster. By the time the EMTs burst through the door, Lily was gasping, her lips tinged blue, her fingers still twitching. They worked quickly, efficiently. Oxygen, straps, vitals, questions I barely answered. One of them asked, when was her last dose? And I choked on the truth. She didn't get it. It was taken by a neighbor. I have proof. His eyes went wide, but he didn't hesitate. Let's go. Now. At the ER, they rushed her through triage while I paced in the waiting room, my hands shaking uncontrollably. A nurse came out at one point to update me. They had stabilized her, but her vitals were still erratic. The doctor came soon after, an older man with kind eyes but a face etched with concern. She's going to be okay, he said gently, but it was close. Another 10, 15 minutes, and we might have been dealing with a different outcome. I covered my mouth with both hands, the weight of those words crashing over me like a wave. He asked what had happened, and I told him everything. The delivery, the theft, Karen, the HOA. His expression hardened as I spoke. When I finished, he said, "We're documenting this as medical interference. That woman didn't just take a package, she put your daughter's life in danger. This needs to be reported." I nodded through tears. It already is. Lily was asleep when they finally let me into the room. She looked so small in that hospital bed, her curls matted with sweat, the beeping of machines surrounding her like a fragile shield. I sat beside her, holding her hand, whispering that she was safe now, even though a part of me knew we weren't. Not really. Because safety doesn't mean anything when your neighbors become your enemies, when power is more important than humanity, and when a child's medication becomes something someone thinks they have the right to confiscate. That night, as the machines ticked and the four dripped slowly beside her, I made a promise to myself, and to Lily, I would not let this go. Karen had gone too far. She had crossed a line that no parent, no human being should ever forgive. And I would fight, not just for Lily, but for every family who had ever been made to feel like their child's life didn't matter in the face of neighborhood order. I didn't wait. The moment Lily was stable and resting in the pediatric ICU, I pulled out my phone and uploaded the security footage, the video of Karen casually walking up, bending over to grab the box, and walking away with my daughter's medicine in her hand. I added a caption that said, "Everything I didn't have the strength to scream aloud, this woman stole my disabled child's life-saving medication off our porch. My daughter ended up in the ER. This is what abuse of HOA power looks like." I hit post and closed my eyes, half from exhaustion, half from fear of what would come next. Within 2 hours, it had over 10,000 views. By morning, it was being shared by advocacy groups across the country, parents of disabled children, healthcare workers, civil rights activists, lawyers, strangers. The comments poured in like floodwater, raging, supportive, horrified. People asked for Karen's name, asked what state we were in, asked how they could help. I was still in the hospital, gripping my daughter's tiny hand, when a local news station called, then a national one. I filed a police report the same day. The officer who took it was the same one who had retrieved the stolen package from Karen's home. This time, his tone was different, serious, professional, protective. "We're treating this as felony theft and reckless endangerment of a minor," he said. "She may have thought she was enforcing policy, but this went way beyond any civil boundary. I gave him every document I had: prescriptions, camera footage, the pharmacy's statement, the ER report documenting critical medical episode due to delayed medication. Our case file grew thick in hours. The detectives contacted the HOA. They requested all internal communication involving Karen, especially anything related to our address, medical deliveries, or complaints filed. What they found blew everything wide open. Karen hadn't just acted alone. She had lobbied within the HOA for months, pushing to create unofficial guidelines around medical deliveries, calling them potential liabilities. She had written emails referring to my daughter's medicine as unverified substances and warning the board about chemical exposure incidents waiting to happen. And when the HOA hadn't acted fast enough, she had taken matters into her own hands. Those emails, combined with the footage and Lily's medical emergency, created a tidal wave of accountability. Within days, the story was on every major news network. I watched it on a hospital TV while feeding Lily applesauce, her little hands still weak from the seizure. The headline read, "HOA board member under investigation for theft of child's medication." Reporters camped outside the HOA office. Activists rallied in front of City Hall, holding signs that said things like "Protect disabled kids," "Not Karen's driveway," and "Medicine isn't a violation." Our story was shared by national disability rights organizations, by pediatric doctors, and even a few celebrities. It became a rallying cry, a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority hidden behind neighborhood rules. People started digging into Karen's past. They found prior complaints, unrelated but eerily similar. A family fined for installing a wheelchair ramp. A service animal questioned as unlicensed. An elderly woman cited for visual pollution because her oxygen tank line was visible from the street. Karen had built her reign on appearances and control. But now the mask was off, and America saw her for who she truly was. Our legal team expanded overnight. Lawyers reached out offering pro bono help. A state disability rights attorney joined our cause. We filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We also sued Karen personally for theft, negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and included the HOA as co-defendants for enabling her behavior through inaction. The lawsuit made headlines too. Legal analysts discussed it on morning talk shows. People called it a landmark test case for HOA accountability. But to me, it wasn't about the law. It was about Lily, about every breath she fought to take that night, about every minute she spent trembling in her hospital bed because one woman thought she had the right to decide whose life mattered. We launched a fundraiser to cover medical bills and legal costs. It exceeded its goal in 48 hours, not just from friends, but from strangers, from parents, teachers, nurses, and people with disabilities who had lived stories like ours in silence. They wrote messages like, "Thank you for speaking up. We were too scared. You're not alone." And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone either. I felt like the world had finally turned around to face us. Not to pity us, but to stand with us. Karen, once the smug queen of clipped hedges and laminated notices, was now the face of national disgrace. And we weren't done. Not by a long shot. Karen always carried herself like she was untouchable. She walked the neighborhood like a queen patrolling her kingdom, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. But no one is above the law, not even the self-appointed enforcer of HOA perfection. Her downfall began with the police knocking on her door at 6:45 a.m., 2 weeks after the incident. This time, they weren't asking questions. They were executing a warrant. I wasn't there, but a neighbor captured the moment on their phone. Karen standing on her porch in a faded robe, arms crossed, shouting, "You can't do this." I was protecting the community, but it didn't matter. They cuffed her gently, guided her into the back of a squad car, and drove her away from the fortress she'd ruled with passive-aggressive tyranny for years. Her mugshot hit the news within hours. Eyes red, jaw clenched, the headline blaring. HOA vigilante jeopardizes child's life, charged with theft and child endangerment. The charges were serious: felony theft, reckless endangerment of a minor, interference with medical treatment. Her defense team scrambled to frame her actions as a misunderstanding, but the evidence was airtight. Surveillance footage, HOA emails, the ER report, and our now viral story had painted a picture the public couldn't unsee. Karen had become a symbol, not just of one person's cruelty, but of a broken system that gave people like her unchecked authority over families who simply wanted to live in peace. The HOA tried to distance themselves immediately, but it was too late. Journalists uncovered years of selective enforcement, buried complaints, and internal memos where board members had discussed reputation risk over resident safety. Under mounting pressure and legal fire, the board president resigned. 2 more members followed. In an emergency vote, the remaining leadership was dissolved. A legal mediator, appointed by the county, stepped in to restructure the HOA from the ground up. Public hearings were held. Community members, including myself, testified about the culture of silence and fear that Karen had created. For the first time, people weren't afraid to speak. Karen tried to sell her house, but no real estate agent wanted to be associated with her name. Her online presence vanished, scrubbed clean like she'd never existed. But the internet doesn't forget. She became a meme, a warning, a name muttered by HOA watchdog groups as shorthand for everything that can go wrong when power is weaponized against the vulnerable. Meanwhile, Lily was healing. Physically, she bounced back within days. But emotionally, it took longer. She became more cautious, more withdrawn. She flinched when the doorbell rang. She glanced toward the window every time a package arrived, silently asking if it was safe. Slowly, with therapy, patience, and community support, she began to reclaim her confidence. One day, she rolled into the kitchen with her speech tablet and typed, "Is the medicine safe now?" I knelt beside her, hugged her close, and whispered, "Yes, baby, no one's ever going to take it from you again." Karen's world crumbled because she believed policy mattered more than people, that her idea of order was more important than a child's right to live safely in her own home. But in trying to erase us, she exposed herself. And in the ashes of her cruelty, we built something better, a community that now stands not just for regulation, but for compassion, protection, and justice. And we're not done yet. Lily's road back to normal wasn't marked by grand moments, but by small, tender victories. The first time she let the delivery driver hand her the package again, she hesitated, her fingers trembling just slightly before reaching out to take the box. I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the memory of what had happened still fresh, but she took it anyway. That courage, that quiet defiance, was her first step forward. We began easing back into her routine. Her speech therapist helped her express some of the emotions she hadn't been able to say. One day, during a session, she typed the words, "I was scared. I thought I did something wrong." My heart shattered all over again. But the therapist, bless her heart, leaned forward and replied softly, "You didn't do anything wrong, Lily. Someone else did. And you were brave." As the legal dust settled and Karen's name disappeared from the neighborhood rosters, something else began to grow: support. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began speaking up. People who had whispered their sympathy now knocked on our door with flowers, notes, and sometimes just a simple, "I'm so sorry we didn't say something sooner." It didn't erase the pain, but it mattered. What mattered more was the meeting held one sunny Saturday afternoon in the newly repainted community center, this time not to enforce rules, but to rebuild trust. The new HOA board held a special vote on a slate of policies focused entirely on accessibility and medical rights. Not only were deliveries of medical supplies now protected and prioritized, but a new neighborhood protocol was established. Any interference with health-related services would result in immediate suspension of HOA privileges and potential legal referral. They called it Lily's Law. The community clapped as the motion passed unanimously. They even surprised Lily. One of the board members knelt in front of her wheelchair and handed her a certificate with a gold seal. "You showed us what strength looks like," he said. "You helped change how we treat people forever." Lily blinked, then smiled, a real one, wide and full of light. Later that day, she sat at our kitchen table, crayons spread out like a rainbow, and drew a picture of her medicine bottles. Above them, she wrote in block letters, "My superpower." I framed it that same night. The ramp in front of our house was repainted with bright colors, and neighbors even helped stencil little stars along its edges. It became a symbol, not of difference, but of dignity. And every time Lily rolls down it, she waves like royalty, reclaiming the space that was once used to control her. I still think about what could have happened if we hadn't acted, if we had stayed quiet. But I also think about what did happen, how Lily's story sparked a fire bigger than one neighborhood, louder than one woman's hate. Because now, across our state and beyond, people are watching HOAs with new eyes. They're asking questions, they're demanding compassion, and they're remembering that children like Lily don't need pity. They need protection. And for the first time in a long time, I believe she finally has it. If Lily's story made your heart ache, if it made your blood boil, or if it reminded you of the hidden battles so many families fight under the weight of heartless rules, then this is the moment we speak up together. What happened to my daughter wasn't just a tragedy. It was a wake-up call. Her life-saving medication was stolen. Not by a stranger, not by a criminal in the night, but by a woman who hid behind HOA policy and called it community protection. That is not protection. That is power abused. That is discrimination wrapped in bureaucracy. Lily could have died. And the scariest part? There are thousands of other families out there, families with disabled children, elderly parents, chronic illness, or critical needs who are suffering the same silent cruelty. That's why I started this channel. The HOA Stories isn't just about exposing injustice. It's about giving a voice to the voiceless. It's about pushing back against the Karens of the world who confuse authority with righteousness. It's about reclaiming what it means to live in a community. So if you've been targeted, if you've been harassed, ignored, or made to feel like your child's needs are too disruptive, know this: you are not alone. Your story matters, and it deserves to be heard. Please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with your neighbors, your friends, your legislators. Let them see what happens when we let unchecked power fester. Let them see what courage looks like in a little girl named Lily. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. And here on the HOA Stories, we'll keep fighting for justice, for dignity, and for every family just trying to live with peace, safety, and the respect they deserve.